Selling is not persuasion, a trickery. It's really buyers buy for their reasons and buyers buy from the people that they trust. I'm all about repeatable frameworks. I'm all about simplification. You are successful, but you can't repeat it.
One of the hardest things in any kind of business is actually growing the business.
The worst thing is you're literally chasing opportunities where you have no chance of actually winning those opportunities.
Disqualify heavily to qualify correctly.
If you can understand how buyers want to be sold to, that is 70% of the work done.
The only way you can sell someone is by understanding them first.
Clarity over complexity.
Welcome to the podcast From Cold to Close. My name is Saeed and I'm the founder here at SRC Growth Partner, a growth company that helps professional services firms from around the world increase their revenue and profitability by acquiring new clients. My guest today is Michael Adonteng, the founder and CEO of Ovule Consulting, a revenue growth advisory helping founders and revenue leaders build repeatable, predictable revenue systems. Over the past decade, Michael has influenced £25 million in revenue, coached more than 100 leaders across the UK, Africa, and the Caribbean, and supported more than 50 organizations spanning startups, scale-ups, and established businesses. Before founding Ovule Consulting, Michael built his career inside global technology leaders like Oracle, Salesforce, Rackspace, and Medallia, where he worked across enterprise sales, go-to-market execution, and revenue leadership. Today, his work focuses on designing practical revenue playbooks, outsourced demand generation, and sales training that moves teams from founder-dependent selling to scalable disciplined growth. Michael is known for translating complex revenue challenges into clear strategy and execution that actually sticks. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
It's my pleasure. That sounded a little bit like a lengthy bio, but thank you for bearing with that.
No, I thought it really does set the tone and the caliber of individual we have on the podcast today. I think it really does demonstrate. I think one of the hardest things in any kind of business is actually growing the business, right? It's sales and marketing in general, and actually building awareness for your business is one thing, but actually getting the deals across the line is another. So have someone on the podcast who has attributed more than 25 million in revenue in their career says a lot about you. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think it's going to be really insightful for our viewers and listeners, but also going to be a conversation I love to have because I love talking about all things growth, all things sales, all things marketing. So this should be fun. But Michael, I think the best place to start is to really introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners out there, those who don't know you, those who may want to learn a little bit more about you. Briefly, maybe you could share a little bit more about, maybe I've done a lot of it already, but feel free to do a short, brief intro for yourself.
Yeah, no, thank you. So morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you're watching, listening from. And of course, it's always a pleasure being on podcasts. And I love imparting my knowledge and wisdom onto others. It's one of my purpose in life. Yeah, so Michael K. Adonteng, I've been in kind of the sales environment for the last 20 years. Pretty much since university, I was a bit of a late entrant. I graduated in 24 years old at the time. And my first role straight after graduation was a sales role. It was a very extremely complex sale in the sense of many calls a day, selling to some of the most difficult buyers. We persevered and we're here today to obviously show all the scars and of course all the learnings from that. So like you mentioned, I've had the privilege of working for some very large corporations with very complex sales processes. And I've also had the pleasure of working for startups and scale-ups who effectively don't have as much complexity, but yet still have the same kind of approach and the same method of we have to sell something of value to our potential buyers, and therefore really just having a way of selling, and you made some reference to a few keywords there, repeatable way of selling, right? Because I find, the one trick pony, there's the ones who can, do amazingly well with this year or that year, but doing it consistently over the years, there's got to be a way around it. So I'm all about repeatable frameworks. I'm all about simplification, and I bring all the learnings of the last 20 years into helping startups and scale-ups grow in the most simplistic way of understanding selling.
Yeah, I love it. And I think it's a key point for our viewers and listeners to hear, in the sense that in any kind of offer or service-based business, professional services business, you have set processes when you deliver on the work that you're doing. There's no reason why you can't have repeatable processes for your sales and marketing side of things as well. And that's where a lot of people get lost, and it's demystifying because sales feels like it's a more of an organic conversation. It's more of a networking, get out there and stuff. And so I think it's really important to understand that it is absolutely possible to build out repeatable systems for sales. But I wanted to ask you the question of why do most founders struggle to turn sales efforts into actual predictable revenue?
Very good question. There are different views on this one. My view is that they struggle because a lot of the knowledge sticks with the founders or is with the founders. A lot of the intelligence and the processes, and we're referring to founders and kind of scale-ups here, not necessarily the corporations. And I find that from my coaching and training, these founders tend to know how to do things their way. But then when they bring on board others whilst they're scaling, because when you're scaling, you don't want to become the bottleneck, right? You want to be able to detach, focus on more of the strategic stuff and bring in somebody or people that can run your sales efforts. And I find that not being able to translate what they know simply onto their sales team or whoever is leading their growth, that tends to be the bottleneck. And therefore you are successful, but you can't repeat it, right? And then you're having to find ways and means of making sure that your team or that individual gets to the level that you're at. And that can take time. So it's just not having a playbook, right? And I would boil it down to having a sales playbook or a revenue playbook that when you're not around, somebody can actually carry it, learn from the successes of how you've done it, and also add their secret sauce to it and look to grow the business. So it fundamentally comes down to that knowledge transfer piece.
I think it's such an interesting point because knowledge transfer it's a point that most founders struggle with. And most founders will find it frustrating that others can't do what they've been doing for the last how many years. But the reality is you've been doing it and you've learned your mistake through mistakes and all these things for many, many years. And you have to be able to transfer your experience, your know-how, your knowledge, your secret sauce into some form of, as you said, playbook. I love the terminology playbook because it absolutely is distilling what is in your mind down to what are the fundamentals. So what does a repeatable revenue system actually look like in the real world?
Yeah, in the real world. So good question. I mean, I can throw a lot of buzzwords at you, right? Because typically that's what we do as salespeople. But I've come to learn that now being a coach, now being an entrepreneur myself in the last couple of years, really kind of trying to detach from the buzzwords and simplifying things for the ones who haven't enjoyed, the tenure that some of us have in corporates and startups. So the number one thing that I always say to customers is to find who do you want to speak to, right? So it's almost like a 3 or 4 step process. What market do you play in is the number one, right? Because you can't sell to every single market. Then once you've defined what market you want to play in or you can play in, then the next piece is you coming down to within those markets or those territories, who are the people that would want to buy from you, right? In the sales terminology, they call it the ICP, right? Identified Customer Persona. But I don't want to bore you with acronyms, although we're going to be throwing in some acronyms later on as we progress. But yes, in that territory, who can you sell to? But once you've found who you can sell to or who your messaging resonates with, then it's about what messaging, how can you polish your messaging such that depending on who you're speaking to, whether they're technical, whether they're commercial, it doesn't matter where they are in the business, the levels that they're in the business, it appeases to them. Because if I'm a CEO and you're talking to me in a technical term, I'm going to be completely switched off. And guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to delegate you to say, go and speak to my tech person. You've missed the opportunity to have that engagement and relation with a CEO. And therefore, your messaging has to be distilled in such a way that it's applicable and it's coherent with who you're speaking to. And that takes time, right? That is a bit where most leaders, most revenue leaders, most founders tend to rush and think, oh, no, we can't sell to this person. But no, but you haven't actually tailored your messages to that person. So is that 3 levels? Where can you play in terms of industry or territory? Who within those territories can you sell to? And when you find those individuals, how do you tailor your messaging that is of value to them? And that's something I want us to double click on as we progress in this conversation. The whole value conversation is where I'm seeing lots of founders not completely being oblivious about it. And I'm having to kind of lead them through coaching to say, what are you actually bringing to the buyers? Can you really say it in 30 seconds? We can double click on that as we progress.
Absolutely. I loved what you said about messaging and actually having it be applicable to your ICP or the avatar that you're focusing on. And we talk about this a lot internally with our clients as well, especially when we start a project. And it's primarily because the way we distill it for a lot of our clients is language, right? Like language for a management consulting firm for sales and marketing will be business development, right?
Yes.
But for a different organization, it'll be the sales and marketing, right? And
Yes.
it's almost as simple as that. But if you approach a management consulting firm and say, "Oh, we'll do your sales and marketing, X, Y, and Z, da, 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 da," they'll turn them off because they're like, well, we don't do sales and marketing, we do
Yes.
business development. And there lies the key factor there, that you have to get your language right. And the message needs to be applicable to whether they're a chief marketing officer, whether they're a
Yes.
founder, whether they're an analyst or whoever it might be in an organization. And I think that's a really important point. But yeah, absolutely agree with you in terms of value proposition as well and how to articulate that. But if a founder just fixed one revenue issue this quarter, what do you think that should be?
I think it should be clarity over complexity, right? I think it should be, and when I say clarity means that I mean things such as who are you selling to? If you can define who you're selling to, right, i.e. the whole ICP piece that you mentioned, that for me saves you a huge amount of time in the sense of when you are engaged with a potential buyer, if they're not within your sweet spot or they're not within your, let's call it your bullseye, right, for the ones that plays darts, you don't want to spend your time with them. And that's because you're saving your time and you're saving their time. The worst thing is, as a founder, a revenue leader with some teams, you're literally chasing opportunities where you have no chance of actually winning those opportunities, right? And even if you do win them and it's not the right fit for you and the client may end up churning. The amount of time and the cost and the energy and the emotion that's gone into that, I mean, we can quantify it. It'll take you months to kind of recuperate all those costs. So for me, the number one thing that I always hone in to my founders is let's really work on your ICP. Let's really work on who is it that you sell to. And therefore, when you meet them, you just almost know instantly, yes, I can actually potentially help this person or these people. But when you meet the ones that aren't, just walk away from it. And that's difficult, right? By, walking away from something because we become emotionally attached to a lot of these opportunities. But that's the number one thing I advise a founder or a revenue leader to get right in the next 3 to 6 months.
I think it's such an important point you've just mentioned there. And we always say disqualify heavily to qualify correctly, right? And you want a smaller pool of qualified leads than a large pool of leads that you have to work through and you're not unsure about. And you're going to have a huge amount of tire kickers in that pool of leads, right? And you want to be having conversations with people that actually have a pain or problem that you can solve. And if they don't have that pain or problem that you can solve, then you're wasting everyone's time. They may eventually have that pain or problem, but at that moment they don't. So use that time to spend it on to find someone or spend it with a lead that actually has a pain and problem that you can solve. So I think you're absolutely right in understanding that say no more, I think is the best way to say it. Yeah. Say no more.
Yes, absolutely. I've always said, the other piece, I just wanted to kind of double click on what you said there. When we think about that opportunity that we normally get with a founder or a leader, it's a one-time chance, right? Because oftentimes we've been, trialing, wanting to get hold of these people for either months or weeks. You're calling, you're emailing, all the different methods. And then you get that opportunity.
Yeah.
And that opportunity is pretty much your ticket to say, if I get this right, I have an engagement.
Exactly.
If obviously, the value proposition aligns to the individual. And I have always said to my coachees is that some people call it 30 seconds elevator pitch. Some people call it your capability statement, whatever you want to call it. Your intro, when that leader says, tell me what you do, right? And this is important because we've talked about all the ICP. Okay, now you've got the ICP, you've got their attention. They're looking at you saying, hey, I've got 20 seconds. What do you do? We have to get that right. And again, I always say, if you speak in value terms, you have an advantage because you and I know leaders talking numbers, metrics. And I see so many founders, excellent founders, technologically advanced, like amazing products. But in the translation, it really does not do it justice, right? And therefore, I wanted to kind of just throw it out there. That messaging piece has to be value orientated. And that leader or founder needs to walk away and say, oh, the person you're trying to sell to, oh, I get why I need to do this thing now. Not in a year's time, not in 2 years, but now. And I think that's critical.
It's so true. So true. It's got me thinking actually in the sense that like in a sales conversation, 80% of that conversation is around selling the idea. And the last 20% is about actually closing the deal, right? And so that 80% can really be distilled down to that 20 seconds, right? Where you can articulate it. And then once they understand what you do, then the conversation can go on how you do it, what you're doing. But they need to understand the concept, right? And once they understand the concept and they're bought into the concept, it's more likely that they will actually close in the back end if you have a structured process, right? So talking about processes and playbooks and stuff like that, why do so many sales playbooks fail to drive real behavior?
Now, I'll talk from somebody who used to be a salesperson for a good part of 16 years. And then I'll talk from somebody who's now a CEO founder for the last couple of years, right? And obviously we can dissect on both sides. From a salesperson who worked in corporations and startups and scale-ups, I found the playbooks that were effective for me, that helped me out, were the ones that were very simple and very practical, right? And I've worked in some corporations where it's such a chunky playbook that you just think, where do I start, right? And you all know, salespeople won't admit to this fact, but we do not like complexity. We don't like anything that's admin heavy. We just want everything to be simple and laid out for us, okay? And therefore, what I think founders should think about is, how can I make my playbook be of value to the individuals that are going to be using it? Because at the end of the day, it's not the founder that's going to be using it, because we're talking here about scaling. And as you scale, you want to be able to, like I mentioned earlier, shift and then start building and growing the team. So simplicity is key without losing the essence of what it is that you bring to the market. From a founder perspective, I think it's just really making sure that there's a process, right? Because if you have a well laid out, a crystal clear process for the salespeople, and when I say salespeople, it does include, the heads of sales and the account executives and the SDRs. I just feel as if they know, okay, this is what success looks like in this company ABC, great. This is the playbook that links to how the success could be measured. Fantastic. This is how I'm going to be measured. All right, that's fine. I know my daily inputs. I know my outputs. Great. Let me now add my own secret sauce to it. Because ultimately, the goal of the playbook is to be your living and breathing document. It doesn't necessarily mandate you to say, follow to the T exactly what it says. So for me, from a founder perspective, lay out the process, make sure there are clear guidance on expectation and outputs and how you can measure success, and really keep it simple and let the salespeople or the revenue leaders execute based on that.
So what are the non-negotiables of an effective revenue playbook, do you think?
Good question. So for me, the non-negotiables would be, we start with, it has to have the whole territory play, right? So let's say, for example, you're a company who your value proposition is the UK, right? Or English-speaking countries. Let's not bring in French companies that we're going to target, right? Because that's not going to land with the salespeople. And therefore, that clear explanation of where you play is key. And typically, this is done at the founder level, right? It's kind of the CEO level, knowing your total addressable market. And once that piece is done, I almost feel like the non-negotiables are you being able to articulate the vision, right, to the team. Let me explain what I mean by the vision. The vision could be either quantitative or qualitative. And I'll explain both options. The qualitative could be, I want to develop or establish the most effective sales team or sales go-to-market team in the UK in the next 12 months or the next 3 years, right? There's no quantifiable metrics on that, but it's quite qualitative. That is non-negotiable because that is the vision that then sets everybody kind of trying to hone in towards. So then they could be quantitative. And the quantitative could be a phrase such as, I want us to generate $1 million worth of annual recurring revenue in 2026, right? So then as a salesperson, it's just clear to me that as a team, if we do not generate that 1 million as a team, we didn't meet success, right? So that's the first thing. No negotiables. Founder has to have a vision. Then the second piece is your leadership principles. And what I mean by that is every vision has values that anchors the vision, right? And I say this because look at Salesforce. I mean, they all have it. You may not know, but that's how they build the organization. And therefore, for me, those leadership principles are things such as integrity, time management, all the things which as a founder, you feel everybody needs to exhibit to be able to meet that vision. And I hear many founders say to me, but Mike, why do I need the values? Well, it comes a point where you're growing, you're scaling, and your revenue team, there's going to be some contentions, right? It's something which is going to happen. It will happen because that's just how sales work. Now, I'll give you an example. Suppose you divide your territories into healthcare and financial services, for example. You've got two salespeople working on these territories. Somehow the one working in financial services finds an opportunity in healthcare, right? They found it, but then without any role, there could be a contention between the two reps. And you have to, and when you do step in as a founder, as a revenue leader, how do you ensure that there's a fair outcome for that, right? It can't be, subjective. It has to be objective. This is where the leadership principles comes in. If everyone in the organization knows that there's a fair way of, if, for example, stick to your territory is one of your values, well, when that person found that opportunity, rather than them keeping it and working on it, what do they do? Pass it on, right? So it's key that those values are outlined and everybody buys into that. So vision, the values, and then I think where you got to go to work are kind of the actions, right? So the approach. This is whereby I feel leaders or founders tend to muddle up the complexity. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. There has to be a clear kind of build up around your people, and I call it the 5 or 6 P's. So your people, your products, your processes, your partners, your pricing, and your productivity. So those are 6 P's. So as a founder, when you take your people, that's one pillar, right? Who are the people that you're bringing into this organization? People that are coachable, growth mindset, so on and so forth, right? So you treat that as one pillar. Then the other one with productivity. How are you going to measure productivity for your salespeople or for your marketing people, right? If we're looking at the sales go-to-market. But I think for now, we're just focused on the salespeople primarily. So what does that look like? Well, you have to define that. To be able to be successful in selling you have to make this many calls. Everything has to be prescriptive, just so that when they're not meeting those numbers, it's not really a case of you pointing fingers that you did something wrong. It's not about that. It's really about where are you lacking? It's a coaching conversation. I feel like you're doing amazingly with the calls, but I think the area where we can support you with is the value proposition translation. What do you think? And you just have that conversation. As a rep, and when I was a rep, the leaders that had these conversations with me in that manner of using data and science and helping me to be successful, I absolutely adore them. And there's not that many leaders out there, working in this manner. So again, so if you work out all the 6 P's, right, take all those pillars. So so far I talked about the people, productivity, partners. We all want to shorten our sales cycle. We all want to, get to our clients quickly.
Yeah.
How better to work with partners? And again, you've got to then think about what is it I'm selling? Who are the partners already in my industry that may have these relationships? How can I build a win-win proposition between me and my partners where they can potentially, I can add to what they're selling to their customers, right? Or, I can support them in a way in which there's a mutually beneficial win-win for the partner, for the clients. Now, there are organizations that would have dedicated partner individuals that are working on those strategies. But if you don't have a dedicated individual, those people can still have partners as part of the prospects that they speak to, right? So that's another pillar. And I think that is a key pillar that most founders tend to overlook. Then the other P is the pricing, right? I've seen many salespeople that would complain, our pricing is too high. Okay, as a founder, you have to have a way of explaining how the pricing works. And therefore, as a salesperson, when I'm being asked by a prospect, so tell me, how does your pricing work? The minute there's ambiguity from that salesperson, you've lost the buyer, right? You have to be able to articulate, say, we price based on volume, we price based on numbers, we price on that. Actually, these are the thresholds that we price, and that gives you credibility as a salesperson, and it helps you build trust with your potential buyer. So I think so far I've talked about the 4 Ps. The other 2, the 5th one being, so far has been people, pricing, productivity, partners. The 5th one, which is not coming to me just now, but it'll come to me very shortly. But I guess coming back to those 4, if you can get those 4 well oiled up, right, and build in and around those 4, you're already 80% of your way into the playbook. And as a salesperson, when I come into your organization, I am just pumping and chomping to bits to start because everything has been well laid out for me, right? So then so far we talked about the vision. We've talked about the values that underpins the vision. We talked about the approach. I know I've talked about 4 Ps, but there's another 2 that will come to me later on. Then the playbook has to have obstacles. What I mean by that is we have to be brutally honest with what is in our way of being successful. What is in our way to get into revenue? And it could be things such as, our sales team isn't on par in terms of the knowledge on the products, or our sales team does not do lots of cold calling. They don't like doing cold calling. They depend on emails. or perhaps marketing are not doing as many events. Like, what is in the way? And we have to be able to first identify that friction, and then secondly, find a way in which to flatten that mountain. So many founders, they miss this obstacle piece because they feel like it's like a rhetorical question. I already know it, so why do I need to list it? And I feel like when you list it, the mind almost has a way of finding ways in and around, oh, this is the obstacle. You start asking yourself how, why, and naturally you start finding solutions to it. But the most important piece of the playbook for me is finding a way in which to be able to measure success, right? Because we can do all the amazing things, right? The messaging is on point. We have the ICPs identified. The salespeople are trained up. Productivity is through the roof. But how do we know we're moving the needle? Like, how do we know, as a team that we are really hitting the core numbers? We're hitting the email numbers. We're hitting our socials. We're going to sufficient events. How do we know all of that? There has to be a way in which the founder says, this is the benchmark, right? This is the minimum expectation. And that is the optimum expectation. But even from there, every single individual in that team has to know their part in which they play. So what I've seen success is to say, the founder says, this is the revenue amount that we want to hit this year. These are all the principles and the approach that the strategy, the tactics. These are the obstacles in our way. Now, this is how I'm going to measure success. When they lay that out, that is like the overarching plan. The magic happens when the salespeople then says, I'm also going to build my own plan based off of what the founder has generated. So then using the same methodology, the salespeople will say, from that 1 million, part of that 1 million is 200,000 pounds. Oh, great. This is how I'm going to get to my 200,000 pounds. I'm going to go to this many meetings, this many events. And they have a scientific way of actually demonstrating to the founder that if I do all these things, or all things in an ideal world, I'm going to get to my 200K and beyond. I mean, how will that make you feel as a founder when one of your team members comes to you and says, look, I have a scientific way of getting to my target, and everybody else does that? I mean, the confidence that's going to fill you with is incredible. So, I've kind of outlined a number of steps. Of course, missed out on the other two Ps, but we can dive into that another time. But yeah, I mean, the playbook has all these things. Of course, there are other elements of the playbook that I haven't talked about, right? Things such as your competition. How do you compare against your competition? Things such as, your case studies, right? Your proof points. Where have you done it? What did you, achieve for other customers? Salespeople needs these assets to be able to build the confidence when they're talking, right? And I'm not kind of dismissing all of those pieces. Those pieces are critical, but I think the core elements of the playbook are some of the pieces that I've outlined as a founder to think about.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on as well. Is like the fundamentals are the most important. Things like case studies and other proof points and things like that. They're the needle that moves it from 9 to 10. But everything else before that needs to be there to be able to then maximize those sides of things. In terms of then, before we jump into the next section of the podcast, when is a good time for a founder to think about outsourcing sales work? When's the right time?
Again, another good question. And I say that because the whole sales outsourcing piece, or let me just be specific, the demand generation outsourcing, right? Everybody will know the heavy lifting, and, kudos and hats off to every SDR that's listening, because I've been there, done it. I know it's not an easy job out there. Sales is not easy, but of course, not least the SDRs. But the demand generation piece is in such a way that as a founder, if you don't have the resources and the time and the capabilities to be able to build an effective revenue generation engine, i.e. the demand generation team, which typically would involve doing all the researching, the data intelligence, doing the calling, multiple callings, emailing, before you book a meeting, before you even have the opportunity to then present your solution to a potential buyer, that element is a piece that could be outsourced, right? And, it's something which Ovule Consulting we specialize in. There are obviously many other outsourcing firms out there as well. But I feel as if as a founder, you don't want to become the bottleneck, right? You don't have the time to be able to, motivate first, hiring. Hiring is the number one, right? If you hire incorrectly and you fail, i.e. they come in, you start paying them for 6 months and they leave, it is almost 1.5, 2 times the cost of replacing that person. And therefore, the hiring piece is key. But when you hire them, you also have to retain them. I'm connected with many SDRs that are moving positions, and I ask them, where are you moving from? Well, there was no growth plan. There was no career progression plan. I wasn't getting my one-to-ones. And this is what the Gen Zs are demanding from founders, right? And therefore, if you're a founder and you're incapable of being able to deliver these empowerment sessions to your SDRs, because the role is difficult and therefore you need to make sure that they're empowered all the time. Then you can always almost outsource it to demand generation companies. But I feel like equally, there are corporations and scale-ups that would have an established SDR team, maybe SDRs, 10 SDRs or 5 SDRs that are aligned to the actual salespeople that go out and meet the clients and try and close these deals. What I'm seeing at the minute is AI has and is continuing to revolutionize how things work and even how the standard setup works. So I'm seeing leaders thinking, what if I can save X amount, right? 30 to 40, 50% of my SDR's budget and bring in AI, right? But yet maybe also be dependent on an outsourced team, right? Or what if I can actually completely outsource the entire SDR, but still leverage AI? So there are conversations that I'm having with other leaders who are considering this option just purely because, one, it saves them a lot of money and it still allows them to still retain their core SDRs. And some of these SDRs can be repurposed into customer success teams or marketing teams or other parts of the teams, not necessarily losing their jobs, right? We should be, human about this whole AI infiltration. But yeah, I mean, for me, it becomes naturally feasible for founders when they just can't, be responsible for all the tasks that comes with growing it in a demand generation team. And therefore, it just makes business sense for them to outsource it.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense, especially with the evolution of AI agents that are coming in, and you've got AI agent, SDR agents, and in every kind of go-to-market agents and so on and so forth. And so it becomes a very high leveraged way to be able to reduce the cost and burden on the organization. But at the same time, you can still have SDRs in certain positions. Instead of 10, you might have 2. Right? Or
Correct.
3. And the burden becomes, there's something that's automated that works and does a lot of heavy lifting for that SDR to then be successful in the role. And so, yeah, absolutely agree with you. You need to be human about this at the same time. But like when the internet came around, like people thought that the internet was never going to be anything. Now look at us, we're different sides of city and we're talking over, we can do that with people in the US or anywhere else in the world. So the power of technology is something that I think is so important to be embraced. AI is really changing it, especially in sales and marketing as well, but like in every facet of every industry. But I love talking about this topic, Mike, but we have to jump into the next segment of the podcast, which is what we call the Entrepreneur's Room. And that's a series of questions we like to ask all of our guests to give our viewers and listeners an opportunity to understand how business owners and business leaders think and operate when running their business. So at this stage of the podcast, I like to ask the same question, which is, how are you currently spending your days as a leader of the business?
Wow, that's a multifaceted question. And I was having this conversation with my chief operating officer for, another business that I own, Africa Sales Academy, last week. And it's exciting because before, I ventured into entrepreneurship 3 years ago. Prior to that, I was just doing the one thing and the one thing only, right? I was working for an organization, which was a brilliant organization, but I was just doing the one thing. And since, becoming a business person over the last few years, I find myself wearing multiple hats. So my day, it's a myriad of different tasks, right? Of course, the planning is always key, right? Making sure that my calendar is filled with revenue generating activities. And I'm saying that because I didn't do that in my fair share of business. And I'm at that point where I learned a painful lesson to say, okay, a week will go by and you look at it, you think, how many meetings did I book for what I'm trying to achieve, right? And you're just being firefighting the entire time. So my days are typically filled with adding value. First of all, adding value to the businesses that I'm supporting. But I know, obviously I usually would have somebody that's leading that relationship with the customers. But I'm also thinking about how can I bring on board new customers, right? And although I'm a lead for the organization, I still have times blocked out in my calendar to find new business. Why? Because I feel like I don't want to lose that muscle as a founder CEO, right? I love doing that piece. And when my team sees me doing that, guess what? It gives them that motivation to also do the same. So yes, I have blocks where I'm doing admin, blocks where I'm doing prospecting. I've got blocks where I'm doing strategy, right? So I have kind of times where I'm having to really think about, where is the business going? What's the market trends looking like? So yeah, it's a number of things, but ultimately, what moves the needle for me is making sure that a new business element of things is never overlooked, right? So my calendar's always filled with that stuff. And of course, when customers come on board, my biggest thing is that we initially went to the customers to sell them value. And I find a lot of organizations, when the customers come on board, there's no such thing as customer success or customer experience. So for me, I make it a thing of making sure that I'm checking in, with these customers to ensure that, hey, if you need anything that needs to be escalated to me, I'm here. But making sure that there's that exec alignment, because if they're comfortable, if they're happy, it could always be, one thing, right? They want to spend more with you and grow with you. So yeah, I have a myriad of things, but ultimately it's around planning, strategy, new business, and connecting with existing customers.
Love it. Love it. What are the most important metrics for you when running the business?
Yes. Yeah, good question. So the metrics currently, and I'm just kind of taking my consulting firm right now, and this is kind of breaking it down into the finest detail. The metrics I'm looking at new business, right? So how many customers am I going to welcome this month and the subsequent months coming up? But then I'll always break it down into weekly activities, right? And those weekly activities are, what are the things, and that goes for me and my team, because whatever I do is almost translated into what they've got to do. It just maps into kind of the overarching numbers. But I'm looking at callings, because I'm a big believer in cold calling. Doesn't matter what people say and how people knock that down. I'm a big believer in that. I'm looking at how many LinkedIn engagements, right? So, again, I believe in, as much as I love cold calling, the whole social selling piece is a big play, right? And therefore, we can't overlook that. So I'm looking at the engagements. I'm looking at how many first meetings that we're booking, right? Because for me, that's what moves the needle for me. Then I'm looking at how many kind of proposals that we're sending out, right? And then, of course, finally, we're looking at how many then deals will coming through the door. Now, I've taken it to the kind of the finest detail, because I feel like this is like the engine of my business, for example. And if I'm able to have a meticulous oversight on these metrics, which I call the leading indicators, the output will take care of itself, right? The kind of the contracts that have been signed and so on and so forth. And therefore, for me, these are the leading indicators that I normally measure on a weekly basis for me as well as for my team.
Perfect. Love that. Love that. How are you currently growing the business? What kind of sales and marketing activities are you doing to grow the business specifically?
Yeah. So again, very good question. Currently, so I have a marketing person who supports me with all things, marketing, LinkedIn, socials. I have somebody who does branding for me, right? So this is all the assets creation, my LinkedIn videos, so on and so forth. Although, I've got the skill set to be able to still edit my own videos. Just the time factor has been that I've had to outsource it. And I also have, of course, somebody who does all kind of my accounts. So those are kind of all the finances and stuff. I have a team of SDRs. So I have a team of SDRs in the UK, and I've got some offshore, right? The offshore ones, they come into play when businesses are saying, I don't have, there's a limit on how much I can spend. And therefore, I'm open to leveraging a pooled SDR resource, which means that you can have multiple people, generating business for you. That I outsource that offshore to my team offshore. And then the ones in the UK are the ordinary SDRs that will work for any other organization. But I've made it a thing of actually giving the opportunities to, fresh university leavers or the ones that have been in the industry for maybe a year or two. I train them, I empower them to be able to sell the way in which I sell and the way in which I find conducive to the market that we play in. And of course, they add their own secret sauce to it and they become successful. These are the key elements in the business that I can think of right now that kind of makes everything tick at the minute. Any extra resources are probably ad hoc, right? And they're not kind of the core of what I do. But the core is everything is linked to new business, right? And these are the individuals that help me with that.
Love it. Love it. And it's been a fantastic conversation, Michael, today. And I think you've shared some really great insights around all things sales, go to market, and what it takes to really run a sales or demand generation team with the playbooks required and the 6 Ps, as you mentioned. But I like to end every single podcast with the same question, which is, if you had a magic wand you could wave to solve one of your business's problems, what would that be?
Wow, what a question. If I had magic wand to be able to think how my buyers are thinking is probably my answer. And let me expand on this. If you've seen this film, How Women Think, this is an old school film, right? Sort of ones are like, oh, wow. But it's almost synonymous with the point I've just made. If I can almost think how my buyers are thinking, because if you can understand how buyers want to be sold to, that is 70% of the work done, right? Because you can build trust. Because selling is not, persuasion or a trickery. It's really buyers buy for their reasons, and buyers buy from the people that they trust. I buy from people that I trust, right? And therefore, if there's a way in which I know, you like to be engaged in a particular way, I will make sure that I work how you want to be engaged, and I'll deliver on time, and I'll make sure that I'm delivering value every single time. And if I could do that, it just saves a huge amount of time of your phrase earlier on, the tie kickers, not having to kick ties. Because I will then say, hey, rather than 80% of my revenue coming from 20% of my efforts, it's almost going to just flip around and say, 80% of my revenue will come from less efforts or more efforts. So I'm almost turning that dial around to the point of more revenue, but I know the efforts that bring in the more revenue. So let me just double click on that revenue or those efforts to give me more revenue. And if I had a magic wand, it would be that mind reader of almost having to almost pinpoint to say, there are 3 individuals over there that I want to go and talk to. Out of the 3, I feel like there's only one that I can sell to. Because at the minute, you just never know. You spend equal amount of time on it, right? So if I can do that, oh, wow, I've saved 2/3 of my time. Why don't I just go find the same people elsewhere? So, hey, but we don't have that magic wand. So we have to
I love
live
it.
with what we have.
I think that was quite an original thought process with the magic wand. I've not heard that yet from any of our guests. And I love the film reference, What Women Want, Mel Gibson, if anyone wants to watch it.
Yes.
But it's absolutely true. It's like, it's getting into your buyer or prospect's head it's the skill in itself. And the only way you can sell someone is by understanding them first. There's no better way of understanding someone if you know what they're thinking. So 100% see exactly what you mean.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that book reference and 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey, see to understand before being understood, right? It's one of the principles. It lives today, it's always lived, and it's always going to live, right? And therefore, it's completely to the point you just made, yeah.
I couldn't agree more. Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure. You've been a phenomenal guest and you've had some great insights to share with our viewers and listeners today. For all those out there that may want to reach out to you, may want to find out a little bit more about you, where would they go? How would they find you?
So my consulting website is Ovule Consulting. So the website is www.vuleconsulting. That's Ovule Consulting, all one word.com. You can book a meeting with me through there, or you can go on my LinkedIn. On my LinkedIn, it's Michael K.Adonteng, and that will come up. You see all the things that I get involved in. But I'm also on the socials, but I think I'll keep to these 2 channels for now.
Perfect. We'll put everything in the show notes, in the descriptions below. Again, Michael, thank you very much for today and for sharing your insights.
Sana, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Appreciate it.